over my dead body. Marcus Hale snatched her registration form, walked to the front of the room and held it up in front of 500 soldiers like he was presenting evidence at a trial. Then he did something nobody expected. He pulled out a lighter, flicked it open, and held the flame directly under the corner of the paper. A woman in my ring. The paper caught. He let it burn for 3 full seconds before dropping it on the floor and grinding it under his boot. Navy SEAL or not, you don't belong here. You never will. He looked around the room, daring anyone to speak. Nobody did, until the sound of a pen on paper cut through the silence. Maya Collins had already picked up a new form and was writing her name again. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The day started like any other morning at Fort Harden, Texas. The kind of morning where the air still carried the chill of the previous night, but the sun was already working hard against it, and 500 soldiers moved through the base with the particular energy that only comes before something big. Not combat, not deployment, something almost more charged than either of those things, because this was voluntary, and everything that happens voluntarily at a military base carries a specific kind of electricity. The annual combat showcase had been a tradition at Fort Harden for over 2 decades. It wasn't officially part of the training calendar. It wasn't sanctioned by Pentagon brass in the way that got written into reports. But it was real. More real, some said, than half the drills on the books. Because here on this field in front of your peers, you couldn't fake anything. You couldn't hide behind rank or paperwork or the carefully constructed reputation you'd spent years building in the barracks and the mess hall and the briefing rooms. Here you either had it or you didn't. And for the past 4 years, running one man had proven without a single moment of doubt that he had it. Sergeant Marcus Hale. He stood 6 feet 2 inches and carried himself like a man who had long ago stopped needing to prove his size because his presence did all the talking before he ever opened his mouth. He had arms that looked like they'd been sculpted from pure stubbornness, a jaw that looked like it had been built to take punishment, and eyes that did something uncomfortable when they landed on you. They measured you immediately the way a carpenter measures wood before deciding what to do with it. He'd won the showcase 3 times in a row. The 4th year, nobody had even come close. The soldier who'd faced him in the final round had been a decorated Army Ranger with 12 years of hand-to-hand training, and Marcus had handled him so efficiently that the medical team didn't even need to rush. They walked in, because the fight had ended before the Ranger fully understood it was happening. People talked about Marcus Hale the way people talk about weather. Not with admiration exactly, but with the kind of resigned respect you give to something powerful and unpredictable and slightly dangerous. You didn't challenge Marcus Hale unless you were prepared for what came after. And what came after was usually a long, quiet conversation with the base medical staff about whether your shoulder would ever fully rotate again. So when the tournament bracket went up on the board in the main training hall that Tuesday morning, every soldier in the room found their eyes doing the same thing, tracking forward through the bracket, mapping out the most likely path to the final round, mentally calculating which combinations of wins would lead to the moment everyone had already started talking about before the first match had even been scheduled. Who was going to be the one to finally face Marcus Hale? Because whoever it was, everyone agreed on one thing: they deserved both respect and sympathy in roughly equal measure. Leo Torres was 23 years old, had been at Fort Harden for 14 months, and had the particular misfortune of being both observant and sensitive in an environment that didn't always reward either quality. He saw things, he noticed things, he filed them away with the careful precision of someone who had learned early that information was the only currency that never ran out. He was standing 2 people to the left of Marcus Hale when the bracket went up. He was watching Marcus's face when Marcus found her name, Maya Collins, United States Navy SEALs. The laugh started low. It started in Marcus's chest the way real laughs do, the involuntary kind that bypasses the brain entirely and comes straight from the gut. But this laugh didn't stay low. It climbed. It got louder. And then Marcus did something that Leo Torres would replay in his mind for the rest of his life. He reached up, tapped her name on the board with one thick finger, and turned to the room. "Hey," he said, not loud. He didn't need to be loud. "Hey, somebody explain this to me." The room, which had been buzzing with the particular noise of 100 conversations happening at once, began to quiet. Not all at once, in waves, The way quiet spreads when someone with authority or someone who moves like they have authority decides they want to be heard. Because I'm looking at this bracket, Marcus continued, his voice carrying that easy practice, confidence of a man who had spent years being the most dangerous person in any room and knew exactly what that felt like. And I'm seeing a name here that I want to make sure I'm reading right. Someone near the back said, "Who?" "Maya Collins." He said the name with a particular kind of pause before it, the pause that performers use when they want the audience to feel the punchline before it lands. "Navy SEAL, female, 24 years old." The room's quiet deepened. Now I want to ask something, and I want someone to answer me honestly. He looked around, making eye contact with soldiers. He knew. Soldiers, he outranked soldiers who had watched him fight and knew exactly what he was capable of. Did somebody put her name on this bracket as a joke? Because if that's what happened, I want to say right now, that's funny. I appreciate the humor. Genuinely. A few people laughed. Not many, enough. But if her name is on this bracket, seriously, if somebody actually thinks it's appropriate to put a woman Navy SEAL or not in this ring, in this showcase against fighters with the kind of training and experience that these men have, he stopped, shook his head slowly like a professor disappointed by a student who should have known better. Then I've got some real concerns about the intelligence level of whoever made that decision. More laughter now. Looser. The kind that comes when someone in power gives permission. Leo Torres didn't laugh. He was watching Maya Collins. She was standing across the room closer to the far wall, and she'd clearly heard every word. Leo knew she'd heard it because he was watching her face, and her face was doing something that fascinated him completely. It was doing almost nothing. Not the nothing of someone frozen, not the nothing of someone shutting down in humiliation. The nothing of someone who had already processed the information filed, it categorized it and moved on. She was looking at the bracket, just reading it. Her finger moved along the paper, slowly tracing the bracket sign as the way you trace a map when you're trained to find the fastest route somewhere. And then she picked up a pen. She signed her name at the bottom of the registration form, folded it, walked to the registrations table at the far end of the room, handed it to the corporal sitting there with the kind of small, decisive nod that people use when they're completing a transaction and have no interest in discussing it further, and walked out. Not fast, not slow, just walked out. Marcus watched her go. The laugh on his face stayed there for another moment or two. But Leo Torres, who was watching Marcus the way Leo Torres watched everyone, noticed something. The laugh didn't stay in Marcus's eyes as long as it stayed on his mouth. Something about her exit bothered him. He just didn't know it yet. Sergeant First Class Diana Okafor found Maya in the East Training Bay 40 minutes later. Diana was 41 years old, had served in 3 combat theaters across 2 continents, and carried herself with the particular calm of someone who had seen enough of the world's extremes to have stopped being surprised by any of them. She'd been Maya's supervising officer for 8 months. She knew Maya the way you know terrain you've crossed in both daylight and dark. Not just what it looked like, but how it felt underfoot and what sounds it made in different kinds of weather. "I heard what happened in the hall," Diana said. Maya was working through a movement drill, not hitting anything, just moving, hands, feet, weight, shift, pivot, over and over with the focused repetition of someone running code through a system, checking each function before the test goes live. "I figured you would," Maya said. And what?" Diana folded her arms. "Maya." "I registered," Maya said. "That's all." She pivoted, shifted weight, dropped into a lower stance, and came back up. "I'm not going to talk about what he said. I'm not going to spend energy on what he said. The bracket is the bracket. He's going to make it ugly," Diana said. "You know that? Even if you don't reach his bracket position, he's already made you the story. Everyone's going to be watching you from match 1. "Good," Maya said simply. Diana was quiet for a moment. "Good." Maya stopped moving. She looked at Diana with those dark, level eyes that Diana had come to recognize as her default state. Not blank, not cold, but present in a way that felt slightly uncommon, like someone who had trained themselves to be fully in whatever moment they were standing in. "If everyone's watching," Maya said, "then everyone learns something." Diana looked at her for a long moment. Then she unfolded her arms, gave a small nod that wasn't quite a smile, but was in the neighborhood of one, and left. The showcase opened the following morning. 500 soldiers, 3 senior officers in the stands, 2 Pentagon observers who weren't introduced by name, but whose presence was registered by everyone who noticed them, and 1 woman from the Naval Special Warfare Command who had driven 4 hours from the nearest SEAL training facility and hadn't told anyone she was coming. Leo Torres found a position near the edge of the standing crowd, close enough to the ring to see faces clearly, but far enough back to see the whole picture. He'd learned early that the most interesting things at any event happened in the crowd, not in the center. The center was just action. The crowd was reaction. And reaction told you everything you needed to know about what something really meant. Maya's first match was scheduled 3rd in the morning session. Her opponent was a Marine named Castillo. Staff Sergeant, 6 years of formal combat training, 2 additional years of a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program that the Corps had started running for their elite infantry units. He was built like someone had assembled him from spare parts designed specifically for fighting, long arms, wide shoulders, low center of gravity. He didn't mock her. To his credit, he didn't mock her, but he didn't take her seriously either. Leo could see it in the way Castillo positioned himself at the start. Relaxed. Too relaxed. The way you stand when you're waiting for something you're confident about. When you know how it ends before it begins. The match official called start. Castillo moved forward. Maya didn't move backward. She didn't move sideways. She moved at a diagonal, a small, precise adjustment, 45 degrees off the line of his advance, and something happened that Leo Torres had to watch twice on replay before he fully understood it. Castillo's momentum, which had been directed straight forward with serious power behind it, suddenly had nothing to land on. And in the half second that took him to process that, Maya's hand was on his wrist, her weight had shifted, and Castillo was rotating in a direction his body had not intended to rotate. He caught himself. He was trained, he recovered, but the recovery cost him a full second. And in a second, Maya had already repositioned, and Castillo was now moving from a place of response rather than initiation. He never fully recovered from that first exchange. Not because Maya overwhelmed him, not because she outmuscled him. She was 5'6", maybe 140 pounds, and Castillo had 6 inches and 60 pounds on her easily. But because she kept doing the same thing. Every time he thought he understood the shape of the engagement, she changed it. Every time he committed to a direction, she wasn't there when he arrived. 7 minutes into the match, Castillo made an overextension. His right arm committed too far too fast, chasing a movement that had already changed. Maya's response was immediate, mechanical, precise. A lock on the arm, a redirection of pressure. Castillo tapped. The crowd made a sound, not cheering, not booing, something in between. The sound of people updating an expectation they hadn't realized they had been holding. Leo Torres looked around the crowd. He saw the woman who had driven 4 hours from the Naval Special Warfare Command. She was watching Maya walk back to her corner. She was not updating any expectation. She'd come with this expectation already in place. And near the far side of the standing crowd, Leo found the face he was really looking for. Marcus Hale. Marcus was watching the ring. His arms were crossed. His face was neutral, but his jaw was doing something, the faint, rhythmic tightening that Leo had learned meant Marcus was processing something he hadn't asked to process. He was thinking. And then the second match was 2 hours later. Maya's opponent this time was an Army wrestler. Rodriguez, sergeant decorated 3 years on the Army's combat sports program. His approach was entirely different from Castillo's. He didn't try to be elegant about it. He came in low and hard-looking to get inside her reach and take her to the ground where his weight advantage would become decisive. It was a sound strategy for someone who fought defensively. Maya didn't fight defensively. What happened in the next 4 minutes was, in Leo's assessment, the most technically interesting thing he had ever watched happen in a ring. Because Rodriguez did get inside her reach. He did make contact. He did close the distance. But when he got there, what he found wasn't a defensive fighter trying to keep him at range. What he found was someone who had already accounted for exactly what closing that distance would cost him in terms of structural leverage at Marverd, and who had adjusted her entire positioning to exploit it. Rodriguez was strong. Maya redirected his strength. Every time he pressed, she turned the press into something that worked against him. Not once, every time. It was like watching someone catch water in their hands and use it to make a waterfall. The force was real, the force was substantial, But where it ended up going had nothing to do with where Rodriguez had intended it to go. Rodriguez, to his credit, adapted. He changed approaches twice. He tried standing, tried partial takedowns, tried a combination sequence that had worked against every previous opponent. Maya read each adaptation before it fully formed. Not guessing, reading. When the match ended submission, Maya, the crowd, wasn't making the uncertain sound from before. The crowd was quiet in a different way. The quiet of people who have just seen something they didn't have a category for and are deciding which category to build. Someone near Leo said quietly to nobody in particular, "How does she know where to go before he goes there?" Leo didn't answer, but he filed the question away. He also filed away the look on Marcus Hale's face. Because the jaw wasn't just tightening now. The jaw had set, and Marcus's eyes had changed from measuring to something that Leo couldn't fully name, but recognized instinctively. It was the look of a man whose world had just acquired a variable he hadn't planned for. The third match was the one that changed the temperature of the entire base. Maya's opponent was a man named Sergeant First Class Derek Webb, former professional MMA competitor 3 years on the circuit before joining the Army's Special Operations Branch. He'd fought professionally in 2 weight classes. He was not Castillo, and he was not Rodriguez. He knew exactly what she was doing when she started doing it. He'd studied her 2 previous matches. He'd spent the hour between her second win and this match with another soldier watching footage on a phone talking through what he'd seen. He was prepared. He was genuinely, seriously, technically prepared. The match lasted 11 minutes. This one Leo couldn't fully describe afterward even to himself. He could describe individual moments. He could describe the sequence around the 4-minute mark when Webb successfully read Maya's diagonal adjustment and countered it, and the crowd made a genuine sound of surprise that Maya had allowed herself to be put in a position requiring a real recovery. He could describe the way she recovered, not flashy, not dramatic, but with the quiet efficiency of someone rerouting around an obstacle on a map they've memorized. He could describe the moment at the 7-minute mark when Webb clearly believed he had her. When the energy around him changed and Leo could see in his shoulders and his stance that Webb had shifted from fighting to finishing. That anticipatory tension of someone who thinks the thing they've been working toward is finally within reach. And he could describe what happened next. Not in technical terms, in emotional terms, because the technical terms would have required a sports science degree and more slow-motion replay than Leo had access to. What he could describe was this Webb thought the outcome was near. And in that belief, something in his movement changed, something invisible. Some quality of attention or presence that had kept him brilliant for 11 minutes shifted just barely, just for a moment. Maya felt it. She felt the shift before Webb even fully registered that the shift had happened. And she moved. The submission was so clean and so quick that the medical team, who had learned from the morning to be genuinely alert when Maya Collins was in the ring, barely had time to step forward before Webb tapped. 11 minutes, 3 rounds, 3 wins. The base had been watching all morning. Now the base wasn't watching a woman compete in a showcase. The base was watching something else, and everyone could feel it, even if nobody could quite say what it was. Leo Torres turned to find Marcus Hale. Marcus was already gone from his spot in the crowd, but he'd left something behind: 2 soldiers who had been standing near him, talking quietly, and Leo was close enough to catch the edge of their words as he moved past. One of them said, "He's not going to underestimate her." The other one said in a voice that had none of the morning's lightness in it, "No, that's what I'm worried about." That evening in the East Wing barracks, Leo Torres couldn't sleep. He lay on his bunk and he thought about what he'd watched. Not the fights exactly, the spaces between the fights, the moments in the crowd, the changing sound the 500 people had made over the course of the day, the slow, almost tidal shift from laughter to silence to something else entirely. He joined the Army because he'd believed in the way young men believe things before the world has had sufficient opportunity to complicate those beliefs that strength was the most important quality a soldier could have. Not cruelty, not aggression, strength. The ability to withstand more than what was thrown at you. What he'd watched today had made him think he'd been defining strength wrong. Somewhere across the base, he knew Marcus Hale was probably doing what Marcus Hale did before every significant fight, reviewing everything he knew, running through scenarios, preparing the physical and mental machinery that had made him the most feared fighter at Fort Harden for 4 consecutive years. And somewhere in a bunk, not far from where Leo lay, Maya Collins was probably doing what she'd been doing all day in the spaces between her matches. Leo had noticed. Between matches, she didn't celebrate. She didn't review. She didn't talk strategy with anyone or watch footage or make plans. She sat. She breathed. She was still, like someone who had already accounted for every outcome and was simply waiting for the timeline to catch up to what she'd already mapped. Leo Torres stared at the ceiling. He thought, I don't know what's going to happen in that ring when those two finally meet. But I know that whatever happens, nothing at Fort Harden is going to be the same afterward. He closed his eyes. Outside, the Texas night made its slow, enormous sounds. And in 500 bunks across the base, soldiers who had laughed that morning at a woman's name on a bracket were lying in their own dark, revising the story they'd told themselves without knowing it needed revising. Nobody slept well that night at Fort Harden. Not the soldiers who had laughed that morning. Not the ones who had stayed quiet. Not Leo Torres, who had stared at the ceiling until past 2 in the morning, and not Sergeant First Class Diana Okafor, who had sat at her desk with a cold cup of coffee and read through Maya's service record for the 3rd time, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to hold on to something concrete in the middle of something that was starting to feel larger than anyone had planned for. And certainly not Marcus Hale. Leo heard it from a soldier named Briggs, who had the bunk next to Marcus in the senior NCO quarters. Marcus had been up at 4 in the morning, not training, just sitting on the edge of his bunk in the dark, completely still, staring at the floor. Briggs said it like it was funny, but his voice had the particular quality of someone who finds a thing funny because the alternative is to find it unsettling. First time I've ever seen that man sit still, Briggs said. He's always moving, always doing something. Last night he just sat there like something was working itself out in his head that he couldn't speed up. Leo filed that away. He filed everything away. The second day of the showcase started at 0800. Maya was scheduled for 2 matches in the afternoon session. The morning belonged to the heavier brackets, the senior divisions, the matches that the base had been anticipating for weeks before her name had changed the conversation entirely. But even during those morning matches, even when 2 decorated heavyweights were in the ring, doing serious, technical, impressive work, Leo noticed where the crowd's attention kept drifting. Toward the east side of the field, where Maya Collins was warming up alone. Not warming up the way most fighters warmed up before a showcase match. No partner drills, no pad work, no visible rehearsal of technique. She was doing something that looked almost meditative from a distance. Standing, breathing, moving through slow, deliberate sequences that weren't quite stretching and weren't quite striking, but were something between the two. Like someone calibrating an instrument before use. A soldier named Garrett, standing 2 positions to Leo's left, watched her for a while, and then said mostly to himself, "What is she doing? Getting ready," Leo said. Garrett looked at him. "That's not getting ready. That's whatever comes before getting ready." Leo didn't have an answer for that because Garrett wasn't wrong. Marcus Hale arrived at the field at 0930. He came with 2 soldiers from his unit, both of whom had the particular job that people have when they're accompanying someone important to a public event, not quite assistants, not quite bodyguards, just presence. Confirmation that the person they're with is the kind of person who doesn't go places alone. He didn't look at Maya when he arrived. That was the thing Leo noticed. Marcus Hale, who that morning had made a point of finding her with his eyes in every room they'd shared, now moved across the field without once turning in her direction. Not because he was ignoring her. Leo had watched enough people ignore each other to know the difference between real indifference and performed indifference. This was something else. This was the deliberate, effortful not looking of someone who was very aware of exactly where the other person was. At 10:45 between the morning's 3rd and 4th matches, Diana Okafor appeared at Maya's side. Leo was close enough to hear them. "Hale's been watching footage," Diana said. "Webb's match, Rodriguez, all of it. Somebody on his team has been running analysis." Maya kept moving through her sequence. Slow, measured. "I know. You know, he'd be stupid not to." She shifted her weight, adjusted her stance, came back to center. "I'd be disappointed if he hadn't." Diana was quiet for a moment. "That's a strange thing to say about someone who burned your registration form yesterday." "He burned a piece of paper," Maya said. "That's all that was, a piece of paper." She stopped moving and looked at Diana directly. "What he does in that ring is different. What he does in that ring is real. I respect real." Diana studied her. You're not angry at him? It wasn't a question. Maya answered it anyway. I don't fight angry, she said. Angry is a leak in the system. Angry costs you exactly when you can't afford it. She went back to her sequence. Diana stood there another moment, then walked away. And Leo Torres, watching from his position in the standing crowd, felt something shift in his understanding of what he was actually witnessing. He'd been watching this as a competition, a showcase, a drama between two people where one person had been publicly humiliated and was now in the process of responding. But Maya Collins wasn't responding. She was just doing what she did. And somehow that was more frightening than any response could have been. The fourth match of the morning went to a junior ranger named Cho clean submission at the 6-minute mark, and the crowd responded with genuine appreciation before their attention drifted back to the east side of the field where Maya Collins was still moving through her sequence, unchanged, unhurried, as if time was running at a slightly different speed around her. At 11:15, Marcus Hale walked to the edge of the field nearest to where she was warming up. He stood there. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching. Leo held his breath. Maya kept moving. 30 seconds passed. A full minute. The crowd around Leo had noticed. The quiet spread outward from Marcus's position like ripples in still water. And within 90 seconds, 200 people were watching Marcus watch Maya, and nobody was saying anything because whatever was happening felt too loaded to interrupt. Then Marcus spoke. You fight smart, he said. It came out like it cost him something. Like he decided to say it and then reconsidered and then said it anyway. I'll give you that. Against Castillo, Rodriguez, Webb, you fought smart. Maya stopped. She turned and looked at him for the first time since the registration hall. Direct, level, the way she looked at everything. Thank you, she said. Marcus's jaw tightened. I'm not complimenting you. I'm telling you at what worked against them won't work against me. I know what you're doing. I've watched all 3 matches twice. I understand the mechanics. I know you do, Maya said. So I'm telling you now before we get into that ring, so it's clean and there are no surprises, you should withdraw. The word dropped into the space between them. Withdraw. Not quit. Withdraw. The language of someone trying to offer a way out that doesn't look like a way out. The crowd, which had been holding its breath, didn't exhale. Leo could feel it physical, the collective tension of 500 people waiting for a word. Maya tilted her head very slightly. Why? Marcus blinked. It was a small thing, barely visible, but Leo caught it because Leo was watching for exactly these small things. Marcus had expected her to say no. He'd expected refusal, maybe with some heat in it, maybe with the particular pointed dignity of someone declining an insult. He hadn't expected a question. Because I'm not Webb, Marcus said. I'm not Rodriguez. I'm not anyone you've faced in this tournament. What I do in that ring is different in kind, not just in degree. I don't want to hurt you. A long pause. That's kind of you, Maya said. Her voice was completely, genuinely neutral. But I'm not going to withdraw. I'm not asking out of kindness. I know, she said. You're asking because you're unsettled. And you're unsettled because something you've seen in the last 2 days doesn't fit your model. And when things don't fit your model, you try to remove them. She picked up her water bottle, took a measured sip, set it down. I'm not going to help you with that. Marcus stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and walked away. And the crowd, which had been holding its breath through the entire exchange, erupted, not in cheering, in noise. The buzzing, crackling noise of 500 people all trying to process and talk about the same moment at the same time, and Leo Torres stood in the middle of it and felt with absolute clarity that the tournament had already changed. That whatever happened in the ring in the next 24 hours, something had already been decided in this moment on the field's edge, and Marcus Hale knew it. And Maya Collins had known it before she ever picked up that pen and wrote her name again on a fresh registration form. At 1400, Maya's 4th match began. Her opponent was a soldier named Sergeant First Class Paul Decker. 11 years of service, hand-to-hand combat instructor certification, and the particular advantage of having watched all 3 of Maya's previous matches from 10 feet away. He'd been taking notes, literal notes on a small green notepad that he'd folded into his chest pocket. He'd done his homework. He was going to fight differently. He did fight differently. And it made no difference. Not because Maya overpowered him, not because she found a hole in his preparation and exploited it. But because Decker's preparation, however thorough, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what he was preparing against. He'd watched the 3 previous matches and cataloged her techniques, her angles, her preferred transitions, her timing on counters. He'd built a picture of her style, but her style wasn't a thing she applied to situations. Her style was the situations themselves, read in real time, responded to in real time, with no fixed pattern, because the pattern was always being generated fresh by whatever her opponent gave her. You can't prepare for something that doesn't exist until the moment it's needed. Decker lasted 9 minutes. He was better than Rodriguez, technically cleaner than Castillo, and more composed than Webb. He lost for the same reason they all lost, which Leo Torres had started to understand, but couldn't yet put into words. After the match, while Decker was collecting himself and the next bracket pair was being announced, Leo moved through the crowd to the position he'd noticed Marcus Hale occupying during the afternoon session. Marcus wasn't there. One of the soldiers who'd been standing near him pointed toward the North Training Facility. "He left about 4 minutes into the match," the soldier said. "Didn't say anything, just walked." Leo stood there and looked at the empty space where Marcus had been standing. 4 minutes in, before the match was decided, Marcus had watched 4 minutes of Maya Collins fighting Decker, and then he'd left. Leo thought about that for a long time. He was still thinking about it when Diana Okafor appeared at his shoulder. She didn't acknowledge that he was a junior soldier and she was a sergeant first class, and they didn't have a personal relationship. She just stood next to him and looked at the same empty space. "He's going to change his approach," she said. Not to Leo exactly, just said it. "To what?" Leo asked. Diana was quiet. "That's the question." She watched the ring where the next match was beginning. "He's been the best fighter at this base for 4 years by being more aggressive than anyone else, more willing to commit, more willing to absorb damage in order to deliver it." She paused. "He's going to watch everything from tonight, all 4 matches, and he's going to try to solve her like a problem." "Can he?" Leo asked. Diana looked at him for the first time. Her expression was complicated. "I don't know, and that's the most honest thing I can tell you." She looked back at the ring. "What I know is that he's going to try, and the trying is going to change him. Win or lose, whatever he does in that ring is going to be different from what he's ever done before." A pause. "Whether that's better or worse for him, I genuinely don't know." She walked away. Leo stayed. The afternoon matches continued. The bracket thinned. Soldiers who had been competitors that morning became spectators nursing bruises and watching the field with the particular attention of people who now knew what they were watching for. At 16:30, the day's matches concluded. Maya Collins had won her 4th match. She was through to the next round. Her bracket path forward was clear, and at the far end of that path, still undefeated, still methodical, still the most feared fighter on the base, was Marcus Hale, who had won his own afternoon match in under 3 minutes and walked off the field without acknowledging the crowd at all. That evening, Leo Torres ate dinner alone and thought about the conversation he had overheard between Maya and Marcus at the field's edge. He thought about the word withdraw and the way Marcus had said it and the way Maya had responded. He thought about Marcus sitting on the edge of his bunk at 4 a.m, in the dark, completely still, working something out that couldn't be sped up. He thought about something his grandfather had told him once, a man who had served in Vietnam and come back different in ways he'd never fully explained, but that Leo had always felt in the quality of his silences. His grandfather had said the most dangerous moment in any conflict is not when one person becomes angry. It's when one person becomes uncertain. Anger you can predict. Uncertainty does things nobody can see coming. Leo thought about Marcus Hale becoming uncertain. He thought about what that might look like in a ring. At 1900, Leo passed the North Training Facility on his way back from the showers. The lights were on. Through the high windows, he could see movement. He stopped. He looked up. Marcus Hale was inside alone, working through drills with a heavy bag. Not his usual drills. Leo had seen Marcus's usual work enough times to recognize it. This was different, slower. He was running sequences and stopping, running them again, changing something small, running them a 3rd time. He was rehearsing for something specific. He was building something new. And 40 meters away in the East Training Bay, another light was on. Leo walked to that window. Maya Collins was inside, also alone, not hitting anything, sitting on the bench against the wall, a glass of water in her hand, completely still, looking at nothing Leo could identify. Just sitting, just being still. Two lights on either side of a dark Texas night. Two people preparing for the same collision in entirely different ways. One building, one waiting. One adding to what he already had, one trusting what was already there. Leo Torres stood between the two lit windows and felt with the particular certainty that comes before you understand a thing rather than after, that he was watching something happen that was larger than a tournament bracket, larger than the specific question of who would win. He was watching two completely different ideas about what it meant to be ready collide. And the collision hadn't happened yet. The ring and the crowd, the final match, all of that was still ahead. But the real fight, Leo understood, standing there in the dark between those two lit windows, had already begun. It had begun the moment Marcus crossed her name out and Maya walked forward and wrote it back. Everything since had just been the long, inevitable closing of the distance between that moment and whatever was coming next. And whatever was coming next, Leo Torres was absolutely certain of one thing. He was going to be watching every second of it. Because some things you only get to see happen once, and the only crime worse than missing them is not paying close enough attention when you're there. The third day began before the sun came up. Leo Torres was awake at 0500 not because his alarm went off, but because the bass had a different sound to it. Not louder, different. The particular frequency of a place where something significant is about to happen and everyone knows it, and that collective knowledge changes the air itself in ways that aren't scientific but are absolutely real to anyone paying attention. He dressed in the dark and walked to the mess hall and found it already half full, which never happened at 0500. Soldiers who normally rolled in at 0630 were sitting with coffee and food they weren't really eating, talking in the low, intense voices of people who are really thinking about one thing while appearing to talk about another. The bracket had been posted the night before. 2 matches remained before the final. And the final, barring something that nobody on this base believed was actually possible, was going to be Marcus Hale versus Maya Collins. Leo took his coffee to a corner table and listened. Around him, conversations moved like water finding cracks. He heard numbers, odds, and formal, the kind that soldiers calculate out of habit. He heard names. He heard arguments that started reasonable and got heated within 4 exchanges. He heard one sergeant, a man named Holloway, with 18 years of service, and the weathered certainty that comes with them, say flatly to the 2 soldiers sitting across from him, "She doesn't win. I'm not saying she shouldn't. I'm saying she doesn't. Marcus finds a way. He always finds a way. That's what he does." The soldier across from Holloway, younger, maybe 25, said, "You watched the same matches I watched, right? You saw Webb. You saw what she did to Webb." "I saw," Holloway said, and Holloway wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "And Marcus Hale isn't Webb. Marcus Hale is something Webb isn't even in the same conversation as." He paused. "But I'll tell you something that's keeping me up at night." "What?" Holloway looked down at his coffee. "I'm not sure Marcus knows how to fight someone who doesn't need to beat him, who isn't trying to beat him." He looked up. Every fighter he's ever faced wanted to win, wanted it bad enough that the wanting got in the way eventually. She doesn't seem to want anything. She seems to just be there. And I don't know what you do with that. Leo wrote none of this down. He didn't need to. It was already inside him, organized and filed and cross-referenced with everything else he'd been collecting since the moment Marcus Hale held a lighter under Maya Collins's registration form. At 0700, he went to find Diana Okafor. She was in her office, which surprised him because he'd expected her to be at the field. The office door was open. She was standing at the window with her arms crossed and her coffee untouched on the desk behind her, looking at something outside that Leo couldn't see from the doorway. He knocked on the frame. She didn't turn. "Torres, Sergeant, come in or don't. Either way, close the door." He came in and closed the door. She still didn't turn from the window. "You've been watching everything since day one," she said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the neutral observation of someone who notices things professionally. "You've been moving through that crowd like someone taking inventory." "Yes, Sergeant. Good instinct." She was quiet a moment. "What have you collected?" Leo thought about how to answer that. He thought about Holloway's words in the mess hall. He thought about the 2 lit windows in the Texas dark. He thought about Marcus on his bunk at 4 in the morning. He thought about Maya sitting completely still, with a glass of water, looking at nothing. I think, he said carefully, that this stopped being about the tournament 2 days ago. Diana turned from the window. She looked at him with those steady, measuring eyes. Explain. Marcus needs to win this, Leo said. Not because of the tournament, because of what happens to his identity if he doesn't. He's built everything who he is here, how people see him, how he sees himself on being the best fighter in this base. And she's threatening that, not by trying to, just by being here and doing what she does. He paused, but that's what's going to cost him. Because it means he's going to be fighting for two things at once, the match and himself. And she's only going to be fighting for one. Diana was quiet for a long moment. How old are you, Torres? She finally said. 23, Sergeant. She nodded slowly, picked up her coffee, took a sip, made a brief face at the temperature. Don't waste what you're carrying, she said. It wasn't praise exactly, it was something more useful than praise. She set the coffee down. The semi-final matches stuck at 1300. Both of them are in the afternoon session. She turned back to the window. Be on the field early. You're going to want to see the crowd before the matches start. He left without asking why. He already knew why. At 11:15, Leo was on the field. Diana had been right. The crowd was already building 2 hours before the first match. Not the tournament crowd, the official one, that would fill the stands and the standing areas for the scheduled bouts. This was a different layer of crowd, the people who wanted position, who wanted to be close enough to see faces. The two Pentagon observers from day one were back, and they'd brought two additional people whose names Leo didn't know, and whose presence he registered the way you register weather changes. Quiet, significant. The Naval Special Warfare Command officer was back. She'd stopped pretending to be casually present. She had a notebook open and was writing in it with the focused efficiency of someone doing professional work. At 12:30, Marcus Hale's semifinal match began. His opponent was a Ranger named Sergeant Calvin Price. 29 years old, third consecutive year, in the showcase the most technically skilled opponent Marcus had faced in 4 years of competition. Price had been waiting for this match since the bracket went up. You could see it in the way he moved to the ring. Controlled, precise, present. The match lasted 4 minutes and 40 seconds. Marcus didn't just win, he dismantled. He fought with a ferocity that the crowd hadn't seen from him before, even in his previous finals. Something was running hotter in him than usual. Something had been turned up since the day before, and it showed in every exchange with Price, faster, more committed, less interested in efficiency, and more interested in statement. Price tapped at 4 minutes 40 and walked off the field with the expression of a man who has just learned something he didn't want to know. The crowd reacted, loud, sustained, the kind of reaction that builds on itself. People who had come uncertain were leaving this semifinal with their certainty restored. Marcus was still Marcus. Whatever she'd done to the conversation, whatever those 3 days of watching Maya Collins had done to the assumptions in this base Marcus Hale in the ring, was still the most frightening thing most of these people had ever watched up close. Leo watched the crowd celebrate and felt the complexity of it, because the crowd was right and the crowd was wrong at the same time. Marcus had been extraordinary in that ring, and the thing that had made him extraordinary, that heat, that elevated ferocity, that need that Holloway had described, and Leo had been watching build for 2 days, was the same thing that scared Leo when he thought about what was coming. You don't want to go into a ring carrying something you need to prove. That weight slows you down in ways you can't feel until it's too late. At 1400, Maya's semifinal match began. Her opponent was a soldier named Master Sergeant Ray Kimura, 14 years of service, decorated twice for combat action, the most experienced fighter remaining in the bracket besides Marcus. He was 41 years old, which meant he'd traded some of the speed he'd had at 30 for the kind of deeply learned body knowledge that only comes from having done something long enough that it stops being technique and starts being instinct. He was the best opponent she'd faced. It showed from the first exchange. He didn't chase her. He didn't overcommit. He fought economically, conserving waiting reading. He understood what she was doing, or at least he understood it better than anyone she'd fought so far. When she adjusted, he adjusted. When she created a gap, he didn't chase the gap, he covered it. He was patient in a way that the others hadn't been. For the first 3 minutes, the crowd was completely silent. Because for the first 3 minutes, nothing decisive happened. Not because neither fighter was trying, because both fighters were thinking and the match was happening primarily in the space of decisions rather than the space of actions. Leo could feel the crowd's uncertainty. They'd come to see her win quickly the way she'd won the other 4 matches. And she wasn't winning quickly. She was in a real fight. At the 3-minute mark, Kimura initiated a sequence that was the most sophisticated thing Leo had seen in the ring all tournament. He created a false opening on his left side, and when Maya began to move toward it, the first time in the tournament, she'd been drawn by a manufactured opportunity. He closed it and redirected with the other arm. It almost worked. It was the closest anyone had come to putting her in genuine trouble. Maya recovered, but it cost her 2 seconds in a repositioning, and the crowd, which had been silent, made a sound. A sharp collective intake that wasn't quite a wow, but was in the neighborhood. And in his position on the far side of the standing crowd, Leo saw Marcus Hale react. Not visibly, not in any way that someone not watching specifically for it would have caught. Just a small shift in his posture, a slight forward lean, the unconscious physical response of a predator identifying a crack in something it has been circling. He'd seen it, the 2 seconds, the repositioning, the vulnerability that Kimura had found and almost exploited. Marcus had filed it. Leo felt cold in the Texas afternoon heat. The match continued. Kimura pressed the advantage from the recovered exchange, fighting with renewed confidence, staying close, staying economic, using his experience to maintain pressure without creating the overextensions that had cost every previous opponent. For 2 more minutes it was real, then something changed. It was subtle enough that Leo almost missed it, and he was watching more carefully than anyone on that field. Maya stopped responding to what Kimura was doing and started doing something else, something that didn't seem connected to the immediate exchange. A movement here, a weight shift there, small adjustments that didn't appear to serve any immediate purpose. Kimura didn't understand what she was doing, neither did Leo. But 4 exchanges later, when Kimura moved the way he'd been moving for 11 minutes, the pattern of small adjustments Maya had been making had put her in a position she couldn't have reached any faster way, a position that hadn't existed until the pattern created it. The submission was clean, final, complete. Kimura tapped and looked up at her with an expression that Leo recognized as one of the rarest things you see on a competitive fighter's face after a loss, pure respect uncomplicated by resentment, because the loss had taught him something, and he was already thinking about what it was. The crowd's reaction was different this time. Deeper, less surprised, and more awed. The sound of people who have just watched something happen that they know they're going to be describing for years. Leo looked immediately to where Marcus had been standing. Marcus was still there. He hadn't moved, but his face had changed in the 2 minutes since Leo had seen him identify that crack, that 2-second vulnerability. Because that crack, it turned out, hadn't been a crack at all. It had been part of a larger construction that only revealed its purpose 11 minutes later. Marcus had thought he'd seen a weakness. He'd actually seen a setup. And the realization was visible on his face the way a change in weather is visible over open country, arriving from a distance, unmistakable, impossible to stop once it's in motion. At 15:30, the bracket was official. The final match was set for 0900 the following morning. Sergeant Marcus Hale versus Maya Collins, United States Navy SEALs. The base exploded. Not in violence and not in celebration exactly, but in the particular electric intensity of a community that has been building toward a moment for 3 days and has finally been given a time and a place to direct all of that accumulated energy. By 1600, there were more people on base than the official population. Soldiers who had leave were coming back early. Off-duty personnel were driving in from surrounding areas. Word had reached channels that Leo didn't have access to and couldn't fully map. But the evidence of it was everywhere: unfamiliar bases, unfamiliar vehicles, an increasing density of attention focused on a single point 24 hours in the future. At 1700, Leo found Maya. She was in the East Training Bay again. Same bench, same stillness. But this time, she wasn't alone. The Naval Special Warfare Command officer was sitting across from her notebook, closed now, just talking. Leo didn't go in. He stood at the edge of the doorway and watched the shape of the conversation without hearing the words. The NSWC officer was doing most of the talking. Maya was listening in the way she always listened, completely without the small distractions of agreement or response that most people layer over listening to prove they're engaged. She just listened. Then she said something short. The officer wrote something down. After a few minutes, the officer stood, shook Maya's hand with both of hers, and walked out. She passed Leo in the doorway and gave him a brief, appraising look that felt like being scanned by something extremely precise. Then she was gone. Leo stepped into the bay. Maya looked up at him. She didn't look surprised. She didn't look like much of anything in the way that had started to feel to Leo, less like absence of emotion and more like the presence of an emotion he didn't have a word for yet. "You've been following this whole thing," she said, not accusatory, observational. "Yes," he said. Leo thought about the honest answer, then he gave it. "Because I think something important is happening, and I don't want to miss it." Maya looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once the way you nod when someone says something accurate. "Can I ask you something?" Leo said. "You can ask." "Kimura found something in the 3rd minute, a 2-second window. I saw it, and I saw Marcus see it." He paused. "Were you aware of that?" Maya was quiet for 3 seconds. "Yes," she said. "Were you worried?" Another pause, shorter, for 1 second. "What happened in that 1 second?" She looked at him steadily. "I reminded myself that the match wasn't in the 3rd minute. It was in the 14th, and I had 11 minutes to build what I needed." She picked up her water bottle. "The 2 seconds Kimura found were real. I don't manufacture vulnerabilities. That's not something I do. I made a genuine error in judgment, and he found it." "But then you used the error," Leo said. "I used the recovery from the error," she corrected. "The recovery put me somewhere I couldn't have gotten to directly. That's not strategy. That's adaptation." She took a sip. "The best things that happen in a fight usually come from the things that almost went wrong." Leo stood with that for a moment. Then he said the thing he'd been building towards since he walked in. "Marcus thinks he found a blueprint tonight. He thinks watching you almost get caught means he knows how to catch you." Maya set down the water bottle. "I know," she said. "Is he right?" She looked at him, and for the first time since Leo had started watching her, he saw something move across her face that wasn't the controlled neutral he'd been cataloging. It was brief, a flicker, something that might have been in another person, in another moment, the distant cousin of a smile. "What Marcus thinks he found tonight," she said quietly, "is the most expensive thing he's ever bought." Leo Torres walked back to his bunk in the dark Texas night with that sentence running through him like a current. Around him, the bass was louder than he'd ever heard it at this hour. Voices, movement, the charged restlessness of 500 people the night before something they couldn't quite name. In the senior NCO quarters, a light was on in Marcus Hale's room. In the East Training Bay, another light was on where Maya Collins sat in her particular stillness. 2 lights, 2 different ways of being ready. 2 completely different relationships with the morning that was coming. Leo lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling and understood with the clarity that sometimes arrives right before sleep exactly what tomorrow was going to cost. Not just one of them, both of them, and everyone watching. 2/2 Leo Torres didn't sleep. Not a single hour. He lay on his bunk and listened to the bass breathe around him, and the bass didn't sleep either. At 0100, he heard voices in the hallway outside his barracks, soldiers talking in hushed, urgent tones about match dynamics and odds, and the particular unknowability of what was going to happen in 9 hours. At 0230, he heard someone running laps on the outdoor track, the rhythmic percussion of boots on asphalt carrying through the dark with unusual clarity. He didn't know if it was Marcus or someone else entirely. He thought about going to check. He didn't. At 0400, he gave up on sleep and dressed and went outside. The Texas sky was doing what it did before dawn, that particular deep blue that isn't quite black anymore, but hasn't committed to anything lighter. And Leo stood in it and breathed and tried to organize what he was carrying into something manageable. He'd been collecting observations for 3 days with the diligence of someone who sensed they were watching history without being able to prove it yet, and the collection had gotten heavy in a way that made sleep impossible and stillness difficult. He thought about what Maya had said the night before. What Marcus thinks he found tonight is the most expensive thing he's ever bought. He'd been turning that sentence over in his mind for 6 hours, not because he didn't understand it, because he understood it more every time he turned it over, and each new layer of understanding added weight to the morning that was coming. At 05:15, he saw Diana Okafor crossing the quad toward the North Training Facility. He followed at a distance, not sure why, operating on the instinct that had been guiding him since day one. She went inside. He waited 30 seconds and then followed. She was standing in the middle of the empty training floor, arms crossed, looking at the ring. The ring that would be broken down and moved to the main field for the final match. Right now, it was just here in the facility's overhead light, quiet and inanimate, a marked space that had held 4 days of combat and was about to hold one more. Diana heard him come in. She didn't turn. "You're up early," she said. "Couldn't sleep," Leo said. "Neither could I." She was quiet a moment. "I've been thinking about something she said to me 3 days ago. First morning before any of the matches." She paused. "I told her Hale was going to make it ugly, that he'd already made her the story, that everyone was going to be watching her from match one." "What did she say?" "She said good." Diana's voice was thoughtful, not warm, not cold, thoughtful. "I asked her why good. She said if everyone's watching, everyone learns something." She finally turned from the ring and looked at Leo. "I've been a soldier for 19 years. I've watched a lot of fighters. I've watched a lot of people face pressure. And I've almost never heard someone talk about being publicly undermined as a teaching opportunity." She shook her head slowly. "Most people, even good people, even disciplined people, it gets in. What someone says about you in front of 500 people, it gets in somewhere. It changes the fight you're in even when you don't want it to." "It didn't get in with her," Leo said. "No," Diana said. "It didn't." She looked back at the ring. "And I've been asking myself for 3 days why. What makes a person built that way? Because it's not just training. I've trained people. Training doesn't do that by itself." "What does?" Leo asked. Diana was quiet for a long time, long enough that Leo thought she might not answer. Then she said, "I think it's what you're fighting for. Not in the match, in your life. The people who are most unmovable under pressure, they're not unmovable because they feel nothing. They're unmovable because what they feel is pointed at something permanent, something that doesn't change based on what other people say or do." She paused. "Marcus fights for his reputation, his standing, his place in the hierarchy of this base. Those are real things. They matter. But they're things that other people can threaten. Other people have power over them." A beat. "She doesn't fight for anything anybody can threaten." The facility was completely silent except for the hum of the overhead lights. Leo said, "What does she fight for?" Diana looked at him. "The job," she said simply. "Just the job. Nothing above it, nothing below it. The job itself." She unfolded her arms. "And you can't undermine someone's relationship with their purpose. You can mock it. You can burn their registration form. You can cross their name off a board in front of 500 people." Her voice was steady. "None of it touches the thing itself." She walked past him toward the door. "Get breakfast," she said. "It's going to be a long day." She left. Leo stood in the empty facility and looked at the ring for another full minute. Then he went and got breakfast. The field was already assembling when Leo arrived at 07:30. Not the crowd exactly, not yet, but its infrastructure. The standing areas being organized, the senior officers' seating, arranged equipment checked. The match officials moving through their pre-event routines with the focused efficiency of professionals who had done this many times and understood that the quality of what happened in the ring depended in part on everything outside the ring being exactly right. The Pentagon observers had arrived, 4 of them now, not 2. The additional 2 had come in a vehicle with government plates that Leo noticed parked outside the east entrance at 0700. They set up in the senior officer area with the quiet authority of people who don't need to announce themselves to be recognized. By 0800, the crowd had begun to fill in earnest. Leo had been at Fort Harden for 14 months, and he had never seen the field look like this. The standing areas were full before the main event was even an hour away. People were positioned on elevated ground on the roofs of adjacent equipment buildings that technically weren't viewing areas on vehicles parked at the field's edge. Off-base personnel who had driven in overnight were still arriving. He heard accents he didn't recognize, branches of service he hadn't expected. The particular mix of people that forms around something that has stopped being a local event and started being something else. He found his position. Edge of the standing crowd, slightly elevated clear sight lines to the ring and to the faces around it. The same position he had held for 4 days. He was going to hold it for this. At 0830, Marcus Hale arrived. He came the same way he'd come every day, flanked by two soldiers moving like a man who owned the ground under his feet. But something was different this morning, and Leo registered it before he could articulate it. Marcus's face was different. Not the confidence that had been there on day one, that easy theatrical certainty that had let him laugh at her name on a bracket. This was something harder, more internal. The face of a man who has spent the night building something and is now carrying the full weight of what he's built. He stopped at the edge of the field and looked at the ring for a moment. Just looked at it. Then he walked to his designated preparation area and began working through warm-up sequences with a precision and focus that made the two soldiers accompanying him step back instinctively, giving him space, reading in his body language that this morning was different and adjusting accordingly. At 08:45, Maya arrived. She came alone. No escort, no accompanying presence. She walked onto the field the way she walked everywhere, with that particular quality of complete self-containment, not rushed, not performing, simply in motion from one point to another as efficiently as physics allowed. She went directly to her preparation area, set down the small bag she was carrying, and stood for a moment looking at nothing specific. Then she began her sequence. The same slow, calibrating movements Leo had been watching since day 2. Unchanged, as if the size of the crowd around her and the particular charged weight of this morning were simply additional information filed and categorized and set aside. The crowd's reaction to her entrance was its own kind of data, not the silence of day 1 when people were waiting to be amused by her presence. A different silence. The silence of people who have updated their understanding of something and are now operating in the revised version. At 08:50, something happened that Leo would think about for years afterward. Marcus Hale, working through his warm-up across the field, stopped. He stood still for a moment. Then he looked directly across the preparation area at Maya. She didn't notice. Or she noticed, and it registered as irrelevant. Either way, she kept moving through her sequence without interruption. Marcus watched her for 45 seconds. Leo counted. Then he looked away and went back to his preparation. And the soldier standing nearest to Leo, a staff sergeant named Okonkwo, who had been at every session of the tournament, said quietly to no one in particular, "He's scared." The word landed in the air between them. "Not of losing at you." Okonkwo continued, still quiet, still looking at the field. "He's been in high-stakes fights before. He's used to pressure." He paused. "He's scared because he doesn't know what she is. He's been taunting to classify her for 4 days and she won't classify." He shook his head. "That's a worse problem than facing someone stronger than you. At least with someone stronger, you know what you're dealing with." At 0900, exactly, the match official called both fighters to the ring. The field went completely silent. Not gradually, completely. As if a switch had been thrown. 500 people, the largest crowd Fort Harden had assembled in a decade, stopped every sound simultaneously at the sight of the two of them walking toward the ring from opposite sides of the field. Leo's heart was doing something it had never done at a sporting event. Not pounding, tightening, the physical sensation of caring about an outcome so much that the body registers it as threat. They reached the ring at the same time. Marcus looked at her across the marked space between them. His jaw was set. His eyes were doing the measuring thing, the thing Leo had watched them do 100 times. But the measurement this morning had a different quality. More urgent, less certain. Maya looked at him the way she looked at everything. Present, complete, already there. The match official went through the protocols. Both fighters confirmed. The crowd, which had stayed silent, compressed the silence further, somehow made it denser, the way pressure builds in an enclosed space. Then the official said, "Begin." Marcus moved immediately. Not the theatrical, dominant advance he'd used in previous matches. This was something he'd built overnight. Lower, more controlled, approaching at a tighter angle. He'd studied the 2 seconds Kimura had found, and he'd built something around it. A sequence designed to create a similar moment and then exploit it before she could use the recovery. The first exchange lasted 4 seconds. Marcus's sequence was good. It was genuinely technically excellent. It showed the work of a man who had spent the night building something real. But the sequence depended on Maya responding to the initial movement in one of 3 ways. She responded in a 4th way that the sequence hadn't accounted for, not because she'd predicted his specific preparation, but because she was reading him in real time faster than the preparation could be executed. The sequence dissolved at the third movement. Marcus reset. The crowd made no sound. The second exchange lasted 6 seconds. More aggressive from Marcus. He abandoned the constructed sequence and moved into the direct, committed style that had won him 4 years of titles. Power, speed, commitment. The willingness to absorb contact in order to deliver it. Maya didn't absorb. She wasn't there when the contact arrived. Reset. Leo was watching Marcus's face between exchanges and seeing something accumulate there. Not anger yet. Frustration, which is the beginning of anger, the thin edge of it before the full weight comes. The particular frustration of a highly skilled person doing everything right and not getting the result that doing everything right has always produced. The third exchange was the first one that genuinely worried Leo for Maya. Marcus didn't chase. He waited. He did something Leo had never seen him do in 4 days of tournament. He was patient. He held his position and let the space between them breathe and waited for her to initiate. And when she moved, he was ready, and the counter was immediate and powerful. Maya took contact. Real contact. Not controlled deflection, not redirected momentum. She took a direct impact to her left side and staggered 1 step, and the sound the crowd made was unlike anything Leo had heard in the previous 4 days. A collective physical reaction, involuntary, as if 500 people had taken the same hit. Marcus pressed. He'd found something real, and he pressed it the way he'd pressed every advantage in 4 years of domination. And in pressing it, he accelerated. And in accelerating, something Leo had been waiting for without knowing he was waiting for it finally arrived. Marcus stopped being a fighter and started being a man who needed to win. It was a shift of degrees, not kind. He was still skilled. He was still dangerous. He was still the most powerful fighter most of these people had ever seen in a ring. But the need that had been building in him since the moment Maya wrote her name back on that registration form, the need that Diana Okafor had identified in the pre-dawn quiet of the training facility, the need that 4 days of watching an unmovable person had compressed into something dense and unstable, that need was now inside the fight. Running hot inside every decision he made. Maya felt it the moment it arrived. Leo could see it in the change in her movement. Something that had been calibrating shifted into something else. Something that was no longer reading him and responding, but reading the shift in him and waiting. The way you wait when you know the thing you've been patient for is finally in motion. The next 90 seconds were the longest 90 seconds Leo Torres had ever experienced. Marcus was fighting brilliantly. He was also fighting dangerously, and not in the way that made him more effective. The danger was in himself. Each exchange he was committing, more fully recovering, less completely, the spaces between his movements, filling with the weight of everything he needed this to be. And Maya moved through those spaces like someone who had been charting them from the beginning. At what Leo estimated was the 11-minute mark, a shift became visible to the entire crowd. Not just to Leo, not just to the trained eyes of senior officers and Pentagon observers, and the Naval Special Warfare Command officer with her notebook. To everyone. The shift was large enough to be visible to any human being paying attention, and everyone on that field was paying attention with everything they had. Marcus was no longer controlling the fight. He was inside it in a way that had taken his control away, and the increasing speed of his movements was not the speed of dominance, but the speed of a man trying to outrun a realization that was gaining on him. At the 12-minute mark, Marcus did something that 3 days ago would have been unthinkable. He lost his discipline, completely, visibly. He launched an attack that had no preparation and no technique behind it, just force and need, and the accumulated pressure of 4 days of something he couldn't classify, threatening everything he'd built. It was the kind of movement that happened when everything else has been tried, and the only thing left is raw forward momentum and the belief that enough of it can solve any problem. It couldn't solve this one. Maya stepped inside his line. The movement she made next lasted approximately 3 seconds. Leo would watch the footage later, frame by frame, and even in slow motion, the precision of it was difficult to fully absorb. She didn't fight his momentum. She accepted it, redirected it, used it in a direction Marcus had not intended, and could not reverse once the commitment was made. The sound was audible across the entire field. A crack. Clean, definitive. Marcus went down. And the 500 people who had gathered from 3 states and 2 branches of service and 1 government department that didn't announce itself, who had been holding collective breath for 12 minutes, fell into a silence so complete that Leo could hear the Texas wind moving across the open field. No cheering, no shouting, no release of the tension that had been building for 4 days. Just silence. Because what had happened was too large and too complicated and too real for a simple reaction. Marcus was on the ground. His right leg was at an angle that made several soldiers near Leo look away. Medical personnel moved toward the ring with the rapid, purposeful motion of people responding to something genuine. Maya stepped back. She didn't stand over him. She didn't raise her hands. She moved to her corner of the ring and stood there, breathing controlled, and looked at Marcus with the same expression she had used for 4 days when looking at anything present, complete without performance. She said something. Leo was too far away to hear it. He would find out later what she said. He would hear it from 3 different people who were close enough to catch it, and all 3 gave him the same 3 words. She looked at Marcus on the ground while the medical team was still moving toward the ring, before anyone had confirmed anything in the complete silence of 500 people, and she said, "I see you, not triumphant, not cold, not staged for anyone watching." Just those 3 words, quiet, directed at the man on the ground, carrying in them something that Leo Torres spent the next several months trying to fully understand, and eventually decided could not be fully understood, only recognized. "I see you, not the fighter, not the ego, not the man who had crossed out her name and held a lighter under her registration form and said over my dead body in front of everyone. The man underneath all of that. The man who had sat on the edge of his bunk at 4 in the morning in the dark, working through something that couldn't be sped up. The man who had been built by the same system that told him what strength looked like and had believed it completely and had organized his entire identity around that belief and had then spent 4 days watching someone dismantle the belief without even trying. That man. And Leo Torres, standing at the edge of 500 people in complete silence, felt something move through him that he didn't have a word for and didn't try to name. He just stood there and let it move through him. And around him, without anyone saying anything, without any signal being given, something changed in the crowd. Not the excitement they'd come with, not the release they'd been anticipating. Something quieter and deeper and more permanent than either of those things. The medical team reached Marcus. The match official raised Maya's hand, and somewhere in the silent crowd, a single person began to clap. Slow, deliberate. Not the clap of a sporting event, but the clap of someone in a theater who has just watched something they know they will carry with them. Then another person. Then 3 more. Then a wave, slow and rolling, spreading outward from the ring like the same ripples that had spread from Marcus's certainty 2 days ago when something in his certainty had first begun to crack. But Marcus didn't hear the applause. He was looking at the sky above the ring, jaw-tight, eyes open, while the medical team worked around him. And on his face was an expression that Leo would spend a long time thinking about. Not pain, not humiliation, not even defeat, recognition. The expression of a man who has just at significant cost learned something true. The silence lasted longer than anyone expected. Not the silence of the crowd in the immediate aftermath, which had already broken into that slow, rolling wave of applause that spread from the ring outward like something that couldn't be contained once it started. A different silence. The silence that settled over Fort Harden in the hours after the medical team carried Marcus Hale off the field after the crowd began to disperse in the particular dazed way of people who have witnessed something they haven't yet processed. After the ring was broken down and the field crew moved through their post-event routines with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that the event they were cleaning up after was not the same kind of event they had set up for 4 days ago. The base went quiet in a way Leo Torres had never experienced in 14 months of service there. Not empty, quiet, full quiet. The quiet of 500 people all thinking at the same time. Leo sat on the ground outside the East Training Bay at 1100 and listened to it and tried to figure out what he was feeling. He'd been collecting and filing and observing for 4 days with the disciplined attention of someone who understood instinctively that what he was watching mattered. And now that it was over, now that the thing had happened and the ring was gone and Marcus was in the medical facility and Maya was somewhere he didn't know, all of that collected material was sitting in him with nowhere to go. And the weight of it was something he hadn't anticipated. He felt like he'd read a book that changed how he understood books, and now every book he'd read before felt slightly different, and he hadn't asked for that and couldn't undo it. At 11:30, his phone started receiving messages. Not from people on the base. From outside it, a soldier in his cohort who had taken leave the previous week texted, "Is it true what I'm seeing?" Then a link to a video clip. 16 seconds. Someone had filmed the final exchange from a standing position in the crowd handheld, slightly shaky, and the clip showed only the last 3 seconds of the fight and the first 3 seconds after. 6 seconds total, the crack, Marcus going down, Maya stepping back, the beginning of the silence. The clip had been posted 40 minutes ago. It already had 200,000 views. Leo stared at that number for a long time. Then he put his phone in his pocket and didn't take it out again for 2 hours because something about the number felt like the wrong lens for what he'd actually been there to see. At 12:15, he went to the medical facility. Not to see Marcus because Marcus wasn't receiving visitors, and not to see Maya because Maya hadn't been injured and wasn't there. He went because Diana Okafor had left him a message saying she was there and wanted to talk, and at this point in his life, Leo Torres went where Diana Okafor told him to go, without needing additional reasons. She was in the waiting area outside the treatment rooms. Sitting straight, uniform, precise, the posture of someone who has been trained to look composed regardless of what's happening internally and has had enough years of practice that composure has become the default rather than the performance. She looked up when Leo came in. She looked tired. Not physically tired, though she'd slept as little as anyone on the base the night before. Tired the way people get tired when they've been carrying something that required a lot of attention for a long time and have just been able to set it down. "Sit," she said. He sat. "Have you seen your phone?" she asked. "The clip," he said. "Yes." "It's not just the clip now," she said. "There are 3 different angles. Someone in the senior officers section had a better camera. There's footage of the full final 4 minutes." She paused. "It's moving fast. The base public affairs office is already getting media inquiries." Leo absorbed that. "How's Marcus?" Diana was quiet a moment. "Fracture, tibia, clean break surgical repair recommended." She said it the way medical information gets said in military context, precise and without editorial. "He's going to be out of active field training for 4 to 6 months." "How is he?" Leo asked. Different question. Diana looked at him. Understood the distinction. "I don't know yet. They're keeping him sedated while they manage the immediate injury. We'll know more about how he is when he's awake and has had time to be wherever he's going to be with what happened." Leo nodded. "The investigation team has already reviewed the footage," Diana continued. "All angles complete match recording. Their preliminary finding is what we already knew from being there. Marcus initiated a non-compliant strike sequence in a state of compromised emotional control. Maya's response was within legal parameters for the engagement." She paused. "She's cleared, completely. But there's going to be a formal process and it's going to take a few days. And during those few days, it's going to look unresolved to anyone who isn't inside the base. And that window is going to be where the ugliest conversations happen." "The online conversations," Leo said. "Yes, and she was right." By 1400, the base's public affairs office had issued a brief factual statement confirming that an injury had occurred during a sanctioned competitive event, that a review was underway, and that no further comment would be provided until the review was complete. The statement was 3 sentences long and completely ignored by every platform that had picked up the footage, because a 3-sentence statement from a public affairs office has never successfully competed with 16 seconds of video that people have an emotional reaction to. The reactions divided almost immediately and almost completely. Leo didn't go looking for them. He heard about them through the soldiers around him who were looking at their phones with the conflicted expressions of people watching something about their own community get processed by people who weren't in it. The dominant narrative in the first wave of commentary focused on the injury itself, extracted from its context, presented as an act of violence perpetrated by a woman against a man. And the comments below that framing were exactly what 4 days of watching this story unfold had prepared Leo to expect, and still made him feel tired in a bone-deep way when he heard them described. Then the second wave started. Soldiers from the base, some with accounts, some anonymous, who had been there and weren't willing to let the extracted 16 seconds stand as the complete story. They started talking, not in official statements, but in the personal, direct, sometimes clumsy language of people who witnessed something real and are determined that the real version survives. Sergeant Webb posted something at 1500. The man Maya had defeated on day 1, the professional MMA competitor who had been the best opponent she'd faced before Kimura. He posted a paragraph. Leo read it 3 times when someone showed it to him. Webb had written, I fought her on day one, so I was prepared. I had watched footage. I understood what she was doing technically. I lost in 11 minutes to someone who never once fought me. She fought the space between us. She fought my decisions before I made them. She fought the gap between what I intended and what I executed. I've fought professionally for 3 years, and I have never experienced anything like that. What happened today had nothing to do with gender and everything to do with what discipline looks like when it is complete. I am a better fighter for having lost to her. The post spread, then Kimura posted, then Decker, then Rodriguez. One by one, the fighters she had defeated over 4 days found their words, and each set of words was different in tone and language, in personal detail, but converged on the same center. They had all fought her. They had all lost. And none of them were ashamed of it because losing to Maya Collins, as Rodriguez put it, in his characteristic directness, felt less like being defeated and more like being taught. Leo read each post as it came in and felt the same complicated thing he'd been feeling since the silence after the crack, since Maya's 3 words, since Marcus's face looking up at the sky with that expression that wasn't pain and wasn't humiliation, but was something much older and deeper than either. He was still sitting outside the medical facility at 1600 when he heard footsteps and looked up and saw Maya Collins walking toward the building's entrance. She had a small bag on her shoulder. She was moving with the same quality of self-contained motion that she always moved with. Nothing performed, nothing adjusted for public consumption. She saw him, she stopped. Torres, she said. Collins, he said. A pause. The kind that happens between people who have been in proximity to something significant together and are figuring out how to be an ordinary conversation on the other side of it. You were there, she said. Every session, every match. Yes. She studied him for a moment. Why? It was the same question she'd asked him the night before, and he'd given her the honest answer. He gave her the same answer again. Because something important was happening, and I didn't want to miss it. She was quiet, then, did I miss it? Did you see it? Whatever you came to see. Leo thought about that question. He thought about it seriously the way it deserved to be thought about, and didn't answer until he had something true to say. I saw something I don't have words for yet, he finally said. I'll have words for it eventually. Right now, it's still too big for words. Something moved across Maya's face. Brief. The same flicker he'd seen the night before, the distant cousin of a smile. That's the right answer, she said. She started to move toward the entrance, then stopped. What he did on day 1, she said without turning back toward Leo. The registration form. The lighter. A pause. I want you to understand something about that. Leo waited. I wasn't angry, she said. I know people expected me to be angry. I know some people were disappointed that I wasn't. But anger would have been a response to what he was doing, and what he was doing didn't deserve a response. She turned slightly, not quite facing him. It deserved a result. There's a difference. She paused. The result was always going to be the same regardless of what he did in that hall. The result was me doing my job as well as I'm capable of doing it. His behavior had no power to change that, which means it had no power. She finally turned fully and looked at Leo. That's what I need you to understand. Not that I was strong enough to ignore him, that I was clear enough about what I was there for, that he was simply irrelevant. She went inside. Leo sat with that for a long time. At 1700, his phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize. He answered out of instinct. The voice on the other end was calm, professional female, the Naval Special Warfare Command officer. He didn't know how she had his number and didn't ask. I want to tell you something, she said without introduction or preamble, because I think you're the kind of person who will do something useful with it. Okay, Leo said. I came here because of Maya Collins' service record, the officer said, not because of this tournament. The tournament was secondary. I came because what's in her record doesn't match what our training programs currently produce, and we've been trying to understand the gap for 2 years. A pause. What I watched this week confirmed what the record suggested, and the confirmation has implications that go well beyond this base and this event. What kind of implications? Leo asked. The kind that change how we build programs, she said. The kind that make people redesign curricula. The kind that make institutions ask hard questions about what they've been selecting for and whether what they've been selecting for is actually what they need. A pause. What Maya Collins demonstrated this week isn't a talent. It isn't something she was born with. It's a methodology, a way of building a fighter that is fundamentally different from the dominant approach. And it works. Comprehensively, against strength, against experience, against preparation. Another pause. That's going to matter, not next week, but it's going to matter. She hung up without saying goodbye. Leo sat in the long Texas afternoon and held the phone in his hand and thought about the word methodology, the deliberate choice of it. Not genius, not gift, a methodology, something that could be learned, something that could be taught, something that if you understood it well enough, you could build into the systems and programs and curricula that shaped the next generation of people who did what Maya Collins did. The implications of that opened outward in his mind in directions he couldn't fully follow, and he stopped trying to follow them and just let them expand. At 1900, something happened that nobody at Fort Harden had expected. Marcus Hale asked to see Maya Collins. He was out of sedation post-preliminary surgical procedure in a private recovery room in the medical facility. The base surgeon had restricted visitors. Marcus had overridden the restriction by the particular method available to him, which was stating clearly and without apparent distress that he would not cooperate with post-surgical protocols until he had spoken with Maya Collins, and that the medical team was welcome to document his non-compliance if they chose. The medical team chose to get Diana Okafor. Dinah got Maya. Leo found out about the request the way he found out about most things at this point, through the network of observation he'd built over 4 days. A soldier here, a conversation there. The accumulated credibility of someone who had been paying attention when most people were performing their inattention. He didn't try to be present for it. Some things you don't witness. Some things belong only to the people in the room. He heard about it afterward from Diana, who told him with the measured brevity of someone deciding carefully how much of a private moment to share. Maya went in. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Marcus was conscious, medicated, but present, his leg immobilized, his face carrying the pallor of recent surgical intervention and the particular exposed quality of someone stripped of their usual defenses by pain and circumstance. He looked at her for a while without speaking. Then he said, "I watched you in that ring for 12 minutes. I actually watched you, not to find the weakness, not to run analysis. I watched you." He stopped, something in his throat. "You were never trying to beat me." "No," Maya said. "What were you doing?" "My job," she said. "Same thing I was doing in every match this week. Same thing I do every day." A pause. "The opponent is almost incidental. What I'm doing has the same shape regardless of who's in front of me." Marcus was quiet then. "That's what I couldn't classify. That's what kept not fitting." His voice was rough but steady. "Every fighter I've ever faced was trying to beat me. Even when they were doing it skillfully, even when they had a strategy, there was something in it that was about me, about defeating me specifically." He paused. "You were just doing your work. I happened to be the environment you were doing it in." Maya didn't confirm or deny it. She just looked at him. "I burned your form," Marcus said. "It came out flat, not apologetic yet, just stated. The first step towards something that would take longer." "You did," Maya said, "in front of 500 people." "Yes." "And you went and wrote your name again." "Yes." "Why?" And his voice on this question was different from his voice on the others. Genuine, undefended, the voice of a man asking something he actually doesn't know the answer to. Maya was quiet for a moment. "Because my name belongs on the form," she said. "Nothing you do to a piece of paper changes that. Nothing anyone does to a piece of paper changes that." She paused. "I went back and wrote it again because the form needed my name on it. That's the whole reason." Marcus looked at the ceiling for a long time. Then he said very quietly, "I lost to discipline." "Yes," Maya said. "Not to strength." "No." "Not to sound or speed or technique." "No." "To discipline." He said it again like he was testing the weight of it, making sure it could bear what he needed it to bear. "You were more disciplined than me, in the ring, and before the ring, since the beginning." "Yes," Maya said. Another long silence. "I'm going to need some time," Marcus said, "to know what to do with that." Take the time, Maya said. She stood. It's worth understanding. She walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame, didn't turn. For what it's worth, she said, you built something real overnight. What you brought into that ring this morning, the sequence, the adaptation, the patience in the third exchange, that was real. That was excellent. A pause. You're a better fighter than you were 3 days ago. This week made you better. She was quiet a moment. It made me better too. Then she left. Diana told Leo this in the corridor outside in the low voice of someone delivering information that belongs to history, not gossip. Leo stood in the corridor and held it and understood that he was holding something private and important, and that his job with it was to understand it, not to distribute it. The next 48 hours moved the way time moves after something significant, faster in some dimensions and slower in others, compressing and expanding in ways that didn't match the clock. The investigation completed on schedule. The formal finding confirmed what every person who had watched the match already knew. Maya Collins was cleared of any wrongdoing. The record would show that Marcus Hale had initiated a non-compliant strike in a state of compromised control, and that Maya Collins had responded within legal parameters. It would show that the injury was a consequence of Marcus's own committed momentum meeting a precisely applied counter. The record would be accurate. The record would also be, like all records, a thin and incomplete version of the actual thing. The clip reached 15 million views, then 30. The debate continued online in the way online debates continue, generating heat and light in roughly inverse proportion, but the signal inside the noise was real, and some people were finding it. Veterans, coaches, instructors, people who worked in training and program design and institutional culture and had been asking certain questions for years without finding adequate answers. They watched the footage, not the way casual observers watched it, but the way professionals watch things that have implications for their work. And what they saw when they watched it that way was what the Naval Special Warfare Command officer had seen, what Diana Okafor had seen, what Leo Torres had been trying to articulate since 0500 on day one. A methodology, a completely different way of being ready. Maya refused every interview request. There were many. She declined them all with the same brief, courteous message through the base communications office. I have nothing to say about the event that the event doesn't already say more clearly. 3 days after the final match, Leo Torres was on his usual route through the base when he saw Marcus Hale in the physical therapy area. Marcus was in a wheelchair, his leg immobilized, working with the PT staff on upper body maintenance. He looked up and saw Leo. Leo stopped. Marcus looked at him for a moment. The measuring look, the look that Leo had watched and cataloged since day one. But it was different now. Not absent, not gone. Changed. The measurement had a different quality to it, less acquisitive, more curious. The look of a man who has recently discovered that he has been measuring the wrong things and is in the process of recalibrating. You were watching from the beginning, Marcus said. Yes, Sergeant. What did you see? Not aggressive, genuinely asking. Leo thought about Maya's question to him and his answer and the truth of it. He thought about what he'd said. Too big for words. He thought about whether that had changed in 3 days. It had changed a little. Not enough to pretend certainty, but enough to offer something. I saw what ego costs, Leo said. Not in a lesson, in real time at real cost with real consequences. He paused, and I saw what it looks like when someone doesn't have anything for ego to grab onto, when there's nothing there that other people's opinions can reach. He met Marcus's eyes. I didn't know those two things could be in the same room at the same time until this week. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment. Neither did I, he said. Quiet, true. And in the particular quality of the quiet that followed, Leo Torres understood that Marcus Hale was going to be fine. Not unchanged, he was never going to be unchanged, and he wouldn't want to be, not after this, but fine. The recognition on his face looking up at the sky after the crack had been real. Real recognition doesn't leave. It settles in and becomes part of the structure, and what it builds is usually stronger than what it replaced. The week ended the way weeks end at military bases, with schedules and duties and the ordinary machinery of institutional life moving forward regardless of what had happened within it. But something had shifted in the base's atmosphere in a way that Leo could feel without being able to fully diagram. It was in the quality of conversations in the mess hall, in the way training sessions were being conducted, something subtly more attentive, more willing to examine assumption, in the way junior soldiers talked to each other about what they were doing and why, in the way people held doors open a little longer for whoever was coming behind them. Small things, the kind of things that don't make records and don't generate footage and don't reach 15 million views. But the kind of things that accumulated over time change what a place is and what it produces and what it teaches the people inside it about what matters. Leo Torres wrote nothing official about what he'd witnessed. He was 23 years old and a junior soldier, and official documentation wasn't his territory. But he wrote privately in a notebook he'd carried since basic training, the kind of writing that isn't for anyone else, but serves the essential function of making the internal external, forcing the formless into shape. He wrote about Maya Collins for a long time, about what she'd done and how she'd done it and what it had cost her and what it hadn't cost her. He wrote about the registration form and the lighter and the name written twice. He wrote about stillness as a form of power. He wrote about the difference between responding to what someone does and existing independent of what someone does. He wrote about Marcus Hale in his bunk at 4 a.m. He wrote about 2 lit windows in the Texas dark and 2 completely different relationships with the same morning. And at the end, he wrote something that arrived while he was writing it, the way true things sometimes arrive in writing rather than before it. He wrote the most dangerous thing she had was not her training or her skill or her technique or her physical ability, though she had all of those things at a level most people will never reach. The most dangerous thing she had was that she needed nothing from anyone in that ring to be exactly who she was. She carried herself with her, all of herself intact, not contingent on anyone's acknowledgement or anyone's respect or anyone's belief that she belonged. She belonged because she was there. That was the whole of it. And you cannot defeat someone whose identity doesn't require your recognition because you have no leverage. You have nothing to take. You have nothing to threaten. All you can do is fight them, and when you fight them, you find out what you're made of, and that information costs exactly what it costs and cannot be negotiated. He closed the notebook. Outside, Fort Harden continued its ordinary life, which was no longer quite the same ordinary life it had been, before a woman walked into the main training hall, watched a man cross her name off a board, and wrote it back without breaking stride. Some things, once they happen, are simply part of what happened here. And some people, once they pass through a place, leave it different in ways that endure long after they're gone, in the quality of attention people pay, in the questions they're willing to ask, in the standard they hold themselves to when they think no one important is watching. Maya Collins left Fort Harden on a Thursday morning early before the base fully woke. No ceremony, no send-off. A bag on her shoulder in the same self-contained motion she'd arrived with, which was the same motion she would carry into every room she ever entered because it wasn't a style or a technique or a performance. It was simply who she was. And that in the end was something no one had ever been able to cross out.